2, 1. Welcome to the first ISB Vietnam Podcast. My name is Nikki and I will be your host today. I'm a part of the business development department here at ISB, and today I'm here with our international sales manager, Peter. Peter, welcome. And to start things off right, maybe you can share with our listeners and viewers the purpose of this new podcast series.
Yeah, thanks, Nikki. I appreciate the introduction. We've been thinking about running this for quite a while now, and the reason is quite simple. We're having conversations every day with chief information officers, CTOs at startups, and even company founders, and they're looking to find a partner. It may be in Vietnam, it may be in the Philippines or Indonesia, could be anywhere. However, they don't know where to start. They're not sure what the expectations are. And probably most of all, they're concerned about the cultural gap. They ask us for guidance quite a lot, and we thought, well, look, a podcast which is dedicated to the topic probably makes a lot of sense.
Absolutely. Yeah. Great introduction. Yeah. I really appreciate that. And I agree with you. That is why we have decided to create this podcast series based on the demand and the requests that we get more and more into the new year here of 2026. Today's topic will be bridging culture as well as scaling business. And for me and Peter, it's quite simple and obvious because we are two foreigners living and working in Vietnam. What we believe can be one of the biggest challenges is the cross-cultural communication and collaboration. This is at the core of how we're working every day. And I believe that one of the biggest success factors is to have a more or less seamless communication when you're working with international teams and international software delivery. I believe that, Peter, you can share a little bit about how did you end up here in Vietnam and what have you been working with, etc.?
Sure, it's a good question. I came here 10 years ago. I was with an Australian-based company at the time who are a leading company in IT advisory. Later on, I moved into software as a service, IT consulting. Over those 10 years, what's been really interesting is just seeing how rapidly Vietnam has changed. Compared to going back home, I mean, we talk to our fellow expats here all the time. And the one thing they always say when they go home and they come back is how slow the pace was back home, and how noticeable that difference was. Here it's been significant. I mean, right now we're looking at, a GDP target of 10% this year, which is just highlights how quickly it is still growing. And even when we look back at the beginning, say 10 years ago when I first came here, you would run into Western organisation that did have teams here, but I wouldn't say it was anywhere near as typical as it is now. Nowadays, you've even got ASX 200 giants who have teams of several thousand staff here. So it's changed quite a lot, and certainly as far as mainland Europe, Australia, the UK and the US is concerned, we're seeing more and more business leaders who are looking to start teams here, and they have confidence in doing it because they're seeing other large organisations who are having a lot of success doing it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I only been here for 7 years. You have been here quite longer than I have, but it's quite amazing how things have grown and developed since this short time. And what we discussed just last week was we have seen the different reports while we were making, I remember the presentation for the company, that the global IT spending is projected to reach almost $7 trillion by 2030.
Yeah.
And from the outsourcing industry alone, it was projected to multiply by 3 times, right?
Yeah, it was. So I think the actual figure was the IT outsourcing market growth projection, which is, according to Statista, is projected to hit 10 trillion in global spending by 2030, which is significant, so they're seeing an acceleration in growth over the next 4 years, 5 years, rather than it flatlining. And the other Gartner figure is interesting too, because, we're seeing a lot in the news right now about layoffs, but, corresponding to that, we are still seeing these growth projections, which is really interesting.
It is.
Yeah.
If we dive into today's topic of being a cultural bridge between the West and the East, based on your experience, how have you seen the development, and what can you tell us about like what some of the challenges, but also some of the positives?
Yeah, sure. Well, look, this is a very broad umbrella, of course, but if we look at Western cultures and Eastern cultures, they both have quite different philosophies that underpin them, and they really govern how people interact with each other, how they communicate, how they move through life. In Western cultures, of course, if you go all the way back, ancient Greek philosophy, for example, the Enlightenment, which underpin our way of thinking, which is much more individualistic, I guess you could say. Over in the East, you have Confucianism at the centre of a lot of belief systems, and of course, the central to Confucianism is the emphasis on relationships and the emphasis on social harmony, and also a stronger emphasis on hierarchy than we would have in the West. So all of that colours how people communicate and how they interact with one another. Yeah.
True. That's also something that we discussed, that a lot of the cross-cultural friction isn't based on intent, but it's more like the set of defaults that each team will have during this time, right? So if we dive into like the examples of, for example, the challenges that you have been facing when you have been leading.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. I mean, we could probably use this cup right here. This is a bit of a ham-fisted example here, a pretty crude example. In a Western culture, it wouldn't be unusual for me to say, Nikki, pass me that cup, or Nikki, pass me that coffee. Yeah. In an Eastern culture, instead, someone might say, I'm thirsty. Or they might not say anything at all. And so that's probably one example that we could use. Yeah. So often in Vietnam and certainly other cultures where Confucianism underpins the way people navigate through life, what is left unsaid is often central to misunderstanding, I guess you could say. Of course, it's not black and white. You do find exceptions to this. I've certainly worked with Vietnamese developers and managers who've been very, very direct indeed, probably more direct than a manager I would have had back home. But as a generalisation, there is that difference. Yeah.
It's really present in the sense of that people kind of grow up to a default set of norms and values, right, from a cultural perspective. So you can say that the real question isn't really about like if cultural differences exist on a day-to-day basis, because they do for sure, but it's more about how do we overcome the challenges. And I agree with you that here at our company, I believe that the top management for sure try to reflect their values, both having international perspectives, but also trying to emphasize on the Vietnamese values and prepare our teams to, respond and deliver to international standards. So if we maybe talk a little bit about like the bridging the culture from ISB's perspective, is there any points you can share there in terms of how things are?
Yeah, absolutely. So, theory only gets you so far, of course. It's all about the practical, when someone comes to us, say the founder of a company in Australia, he's like, look, I have heard that there are cultural differences. What are they, and how do you make sure they don't impact what I need to achieve? And so what we do is we do a number of different things. Firstly, we hire the right people, and the right people is people who have a well-rounded understanding of not just the customer's culture, but their expectations, really. Because that's central to everything. If you're not meeting your customers' expectations, you haven't succeeded as a service provider. So we are very big on that. We hire senior people on the technical side who are very, very transparent and open and direct, which is in line with the expectations of our customers. We also ensure that we have a bridge. We often have a foreigner in that position who can communicate with the customer. Certainly our engineers our engineers, they often say one of the other challenges is, look, it's not even language, because language is not so much the issue. It's more the typical things that you would find even with a team back home, such as maybe a company founder who isn't technical, for example. Exactly. So a company founder who has a commercial background and maybe doesn't have a realistic understanding of the timeframes. Yeah. So it's interesting to hear that from our engineers, because that's a common problem across any culture.
And that's funny. Yeah. You remember last week when we had the session with the I would say the project teams from Division A, that most of the challenges that we were facing were actually not technical at all. It was more like the the fundamentals of what done means, right? When working in project teams with foreign clients. Yeah. So that was really a big surprise to me, that even though we try to set the right framework and try to deliver, the value throughout our communication, these things are still present when working with the Vietnamese teams. But of course, there are also a lot of different things that we can get into maybe a little bit later. But if you should try to emphasize on some of the the perks or some of the things when you're talking with C-level from, for example, Australia, what are the things that win them over in that context?
Yeah, well, look, certainly there's no doubt that transparency is number one. Transparency and trust. This is not a criticism, but a lot of Australian leaders are a bit risk averse, and it's our responsibility to ensure that they feel safe and that they have trust in what we're delivering for them or what we're going to. Yeah. So that's important for us. So once again, it comes down to getting the right people in place, as we've already done. The other benefit that we do have is, which I think sets us apart a little bit, is we are Japanese owned, and we do have some incredibly good Japanese leaders within this company, and the philosophy that we carry throughout our work, one of Japanese quality. People see that term and sometimes they're not sure what it means, but really what it means is it's a commitment to going above and beyond to get something right, to ensure that the finished product is done correctly and it's free from any errors. That's really it. So it's almost like a quality assurance philosophy.
It is usually the unspoken assumptions that will create the friction, right? When you're talking with, for example, new potential customers or partners. Another thing is that when we see the team struggle, it's not all the times, but many times it's because that our clients and partners, they tend to maybe standardize, processes or team structures, etc. But from our perspective, I really believe that we try to create an environment where we want to understand, but also learn from different cultures, right? Yeah. I believe that both you and I had the need to adapt and understand about the Vietnamese culture before being able to really, adapt to the working environments and understand that it might not be how we are used to from our mother countries. Yeah. But for sure, it's also one of the biggest takeaways when you work overseas, that you learn a lot. And I can see that some of the previous projects that we have been successful with, our team members within those project teams have grown significantly.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I don't know if you have any, let's say, lessons or key takeaways you want to share.
Yeah, one thing I did notice is that and I find generally our customers have been very good with this, is that you get back what you give, I guess you could say. So if we have customers who are really open and enthusiastic about working with people from a different culture, that's naturally just going to create a really, really good collaborative environment, and it's going to make our staff feel safer to be honest with the customer as well, and to be able to feel confident in being transparent with them. I've noticed that certainly, the customers that get the most out of collaboration with us is doing a little bit of work. It doesn't have to be, not saying you have to read a big philosophical or cultural encyclopedia or anything like that, but understanding the people you're working with, what their culture's like, and things that are important to them, as you would do with your own stuff in your own office back home.
I believe, you have received a lot of requests from people from Australia, C-level, that have an interest in outsourcing in general, but may be reluctant to take the leap and really initiate something. So when you talk with these C-level people, what are the drivers for them, to contact you, or when you contact them, what are the things that may be the value that you can share with them, so they decide to move on with us?
I could probably use an example of, I know 2 or 3 executives who've had really, really successful outcomes with teams here. And they have said, it really boils down to some pretty simple things. The first one is due diligence. When you're looking to partner with an outsourcing company, ask all the hard questions. How long have they been in operation? What do their case studies look like? What track record do they have? What is management like? Do they have people from my own culture there? Quite often with Australian customers, they like to know I'm here, and I know with European customers, they like to know that you're there. And certainly, as well as that, look at the culture itself. Does the culture align? We ran a webinar quite recently where we did a bit of a deep dive into Vietnamese culture. And Vietnam ticks a lot of boxes for Europeans, Americans, and Australians. A proactive, problem-solving work culture is one of them. Really high rates of staff retention, modern delivery methodologies, and people who they're hungry for success. We find that our staff are, the idea of going a bit beyond what is expected is embraced a lot. Yeah.
Absolutely, I agree. Yeah. It's quite common that the people or companies that we continue to work with are long-term commitments. In the beginning, I remember that we had a lot of cases where we spent a lot of efforts in trying to be very transparent and clear in the communication, be there for them, right? And ensuring that the onboarding process was very transparent and clear to them. Yeah. And I remember also working with some potential Australian companies where they said, even though they did not choose us, they always gave us the feedback that they appreciate our clear communication and the transparency. Yeah. Is there anything, Peter, before we wrap up this very first podcast from ISB Vietnam, you would like to say to our listeners?
Yeah, well, thank you for joining us first. I really appreciate it. As you may have noticed, we're quite rusty because we are not podcast veterans, so I appreciate your patience. Probably the last thing I would say is that the barriers between cultures, West and East, they aren't barriers by default. They're just maybe small challenges, I guess you could say, and they're very easily overcome with a little bit of patience, understanding, and appreciation both ways.
Thank you very much for your participation and joining this first podcast. I know that you will be the first of many guests that we have planned for the coming year of 2026. And if I should say a final note, it would also be try to embrace the new potential partner and understand more about the culture and how they're working, and both the short-term return on investment, but also for sure the long-term. Yeah. So to our listeners, if any of this resonated with you, or you have any interest in knowing more about software outsourcing in general from Vietnam, and specifically with ISB Vietnam, we encourage you to stay tuned and follow our social media channels. All of the links to Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube will be posted under this video. And for this, I just want to thank you, both Peter and our listeners, to joining the first ever ISB Vietnam podcast. If you find it relevant, you can also share with your colleagues or your friends or potential partners. So until next time, and see you.